over a tutorial on how to play Dominion. Now I know what you're thinking. Dominion's been around forever, and everybody knows how to play it. That's not necessarily true. There are people who don't know how to play Dominion, and since so many people do know how to play it, it could be intimidating for a new player to step into a game with people who've been playing it for a long time. So I thought it'd be a good idea to go over the base game and how to play it. That way, someone who doesn't know how to play it will know at least the mechanisms of how the game works, and then would be able to step into a game with more experienced players. And since there are, I don't know, a handful of expansions, then they would only have to ask which expansions are being played and what are the specific mechanisms of that expansion. And if you know the base mechanics of the game, adding an expansion or two isn't that complicated. So I'm just going to be going over the base game. It's your choice whether you're going to go with just the base game or then add some kind of expansion to it. But in any case, let's take a look. So this is the basic setup for a game of Dominion. It is a quintessential card building game, and the goal of the game is to have as many victory points in your hand at the end of the game as possible. And you get victory points from these victory cards. But you don't want to buy them too early in the game because they don't have any value during the gameplay. They only add value at the end of the game. So if you buy them too early, they're kind of like dead cards in your hand. So for the rest of the game, you're going to be building up money in order to buy action cards, which let you take actions during the game. So these are your money cards. There are coppers, which are worth 1, silvers, which are worth 2, and gold, which are worth 3. I do want to point out that this can be sometimes confusing when you first start playing, that the cost of these cards is different. Copper is worth 1 when you purchase other cards, but it has a value of 0, so it costs 0 to purchase this card. Silver is worth 2 when you're purchasing cards, but it costs 3 to buy. So make sure you pay attention to the difference between the value of the card and the cost, which is located at the lower left-hand corner. So these are the money cards that you're going to be trying to acquire in order to purchase other cards during the game. The victory cards are estates, duchies, and provinces. Estates are worth 1 and cost 2. Duchies are worth 3 and cost 5. And provinces are worth 6 and cost 8. I've set out the curse card deck just so you can see it. In this particular game, the curse cards won't be involved, but they will be involved in other games. There are certain cards that will bring the curse cards into play. If you get a curse card in your hand, which is a bad thing, it subtracts 1 from your victory point total at the end of the game. This is a trash pile. There is a distinct difference between trashing a card and discarding a card. When you trash a card, it goes to this pile and is out of the game. When you discard a card, it goes into your own discard pile and stays in the game. These are your action cards that you'll purchase throughout the game in order to give you actions. I know that sounds obvious, but I'll explain how that works when I go over your turn order. There are 3 phases to your turn. The first phase is the action phase. If you have any of these action cards in your hand, you can play them and take the action that's on the card. You may play 1 action card per turn unless you have a card that lets you play more than 1 action card. The second phase of your turn is the buy phase. If you have money in your hand, you can then purchase 1 card from anywhere in the supply. You can only purchase 1 card during the buy phase unless you have an action card that you've played that says that you can buy more than 1 card on that turn. The third phase is cleanup. You take all the cards that you didn't play that are in your hand and put them in your discard pile, and then you draw 5 cards so that you're ready for your next hand. Everyone starts the game with 3 estate cards, so there's worth 1 victory point each, and 7 coppers. So that's your starting deck, and that's what's in each of these decks here. So at the beginning of the game, you're going to take your 3 estates and your 7 coppers, and you're going to shuffle them. And if you're playing with someone else's deck, especially if it's not sleeved, you may want to ask them what their preferred method of shuffling is. During the very beginning, when you have a small deck, it's easiest to shuffle in this method and not in the traditional shuffle method that you would do with like a traditional deck of cards. So once that's done, you put those off to one side because you want to make sure you keep your draw pile and your discard pile separate. So you draw 5 cards to start. So those are my 5 cards. We'll draw 5 cards for my invisible friends. So obviously at the beginning of the game, you know that no one has any action cards in their hand. And they won't have any action cards in their hand until the 3rd time around. Because the initial cards that you get are going to go into your discard pile. And once your draw pile is exhausted, then you shuffle your discard pile and it becomes your draw pile. I'll show you. So for my first hand, I have 2 estates, which, like I say, those are dead cards. They don't do me any good. But I have 3 coppers, so I could purchase a card. The way I've arranged these action cards is by value. So the top row, they're both cost of 2. These are cost of 3. These are cost of 4, and these are cost of 5. And I always do that when I play this game. I separate them by how much they cost. It's the easiest way to quickly look at the action cards and know which ones you can afford to buy. So I could buy an action card, or I could purchase a silver, because silvers cost 3. So let's say I'm going to use my 3 coppers to buy 1 silver. And then I take the cards that were in my hand, or the cards that I used, and I put them in my discard pile, which I'll do face up. And then the next player takes their turn, and they're going to do the same thing. They happen to have 4 coppers in their hands, so perhaps they're going to buy a militia, which is an attack card. And I will show you an example of these action cards shortly. So they're done with their turn, cards go to the discard pile, and they would draw their next 5. And I would have drawn my next 5 as well. And this player has 3 copper as well, but let's say that they want to buy a village. So they buy a village. And then that goes to their discard pile. So I'm going to skip one round to get people some action cards in their hands before I show you some more. So let me zoom in on some of these action cards and show you what's on them so that you can see some examples. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I'm going to show you just a few of the mechanisms that are going to show up on action cards. This action card is a moat, and it's actually called an action and a reaction card, which you can tell by the blue border on the card. The action that you can take is to draw 2 extra cards on that turn. Below that there's a line, and then it explains what you would do in a reaction. And the reaction for the moat is that it prevents you from being the subject of an attack from another player. So if another player plays an attack card, then you would be, if you have this in your hand, you could show it and then not be subjected to the attack from that player. This is the cellar. It allows you to take 1 additional action that turn. So if you have more than 1 action card in your hand, you could choose to play this first and then play another action card. You can also discard any number of cards from your hand. And the number of cards you discard allows you to draw that many additional cards that turn. So if you discard, say, 2 cards from your hand that you don't want to use, you can then draw 2 cards from the top of your deck. The village lets you draw an additional card and take 2 extra actions. So you could play as many as a total of 3 actions that turn, including this card. The woodcutter lets you buy 1 additional card during the buy phase, It also gives you +2 coins for that turn only during the buy phase. The workshop lets you gain an additional card costing up to 4 coins. So you could choose from anything in the supply that's worth 4 coins or less. For instance, this card is worth 3, so you could choose that card, and you would add it to your discard pile. Okay, so now let's see what a round looks like once people have some additional cards in their hand. So in this case, I drew 2 coppers, 2 estates, and a workshop. So the first phase is the action phase. So I can play this workshop and gain a card costing up to 4. So let's say I would like to have a militia. I would take that card and I'm going to put it in my discard pile. I can't use it right away, and it doesn't go to the top of my deck. It goes to my discard pile. There are certain cards in the game that will say specifically they go to the top of your deck. In general, whenever you gain a card or purchase a card, it goes to your discard pile. So now I have the buy phase, and I have 2 coppers. So I could purchase a moat or a cellar, or I could purchase a copper which is worth 0. In this case, I'm going to purchase a moat. So then all the cards that I've used and the cards in my hand go to my discard pile, and then I draw 5 more cards for my next turn. So now this player to my right takes a turn, and they have 1 estate, 3 coppers, and a militia. So for their action, they're going to play the militia. It's going to give them 2 coins during the buy phase. But the action is that each other player has to discard down to 3 cards in their hand. Ooh, so it's an attack card. If you had a moat in your hand at this point, you could show it and then not have to do that. So everybody has to discard down to 3. So obviously I'm going to discard an estate because it doesn't do me any good. I have coppers, so I'm going to discard a copper. And obviously you don't show the other players what you have in your hand while you're doing this. This player happens to have 2 estates, so it doesn't matter to him. He's going to discard his 2 estates. And he's down to 3 cards. So now it's the buy phase for this player. They have 3 coppers plus the 2 coins that are on the militia cards. They have a total of 5. So they're going to purchase a market. And then all the cards in the cleanup phase go to the discard pile, and they draw back up to 5. Now this person takes a turn, and they only have 3 cards in their hand because of that nasty militia, but they have some interesting choices. They have 2 action cards, and the first one that they have is the village, which I pointed out earlier. So they're going to play that one first. Just going to let them draw 1 additional card, which is a copper. And it lets them take 2 more actions. Now, they happen to only have 1 more action card in their hand. If they had 2 more, they could play 2 more cards. So they're going to play the woodcutter. And the best way to keep track of multiple actions is to create what I would call an action tree. So you would play it on this card to show that that's why you're playing this additional action card, is that it's related to this one. If you played, say if they had this card too, you would also play it like that. So you're creating a little bit of a tree, because sometimes you can get multiple cards that give you multiple actions, and you can create this kind of tree to help you keep track of if you've played the right action card the right number of action cards or not. So the woodcutter then gives them +1 buy during the buy phase, and +2 coins. So they have 2 coppers +2, that gives them 4. And they can buy 1 additional card. So in this case, let's say they choose to purchase a throne room. That costs 4. So now they've spent all their money, but they could still purchase an additional card. Now remember, coppers cost 0. So you can always buy a copper even if you don't have any money in your hand, or if you have this situation where you have a plus buy and you've spent your money on other cards. So then all of these go into your discard pile, and you draw back up to 5. And now everybody's ready for their next turn. This continues throughout the game until either the province pile is empty or any 3 piles in the supply are empty. At that point, you count up the number of victory points in your hand, and whoever has the most wins. So at the beginning of the game, obviously you're trying to get more money cards, you're trying to get action cards that will help you purchase things, and then as the game goes on, towards the middle of the game, and definitely at the end of the game, you're going to be aiming for trying to get victory cards. You can see how at the beginning they're a little bit of a, like I said, a dead card in your hand because they're not worth any actions and are not worth any money. But obviously you need them to win the game. So through the course of playing the game, you'll find a balance between purchasing victory cards and purchasing the other cards that will help you during the course of the game. If this is your first or second game through and you're not sure when to start doing that, pay attention to when the other players start doing it. If there are more experienced players that you're playing with, when they start purchasing victory cards, you can kind of get the feeling that you should probably start doing that too. It's a wonderful game. It has high replayability, even if you only have the base set. Once you start adding in the expansions, it has even greater replayability. It appeals to a huge audience. There are a lot of people that play it. I've played it with everyone from my parents who really don't play the gamey games to people who are much more hardcore type gamers. They also have Dominion tournaments. I think there's a national Dominion tournament. So it has wide-ranging appeal. I highly recommend it. Start with the base set. If you like the base set, then you can start to add on some expansions. Thank you so much for visiting the Dragon Table. I will see you next time.